Chris Bursner. Let's welcome Chris.
What were you doing when you were 21? Where were you? What were you thinking? I won't ask you all, it'd be impossible, but I know I was in the middle of Europe, hitching around, having the adventure of my life. A sort of Gulliver's Travels adventure where anything could happen. Madam Toastmaster, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell you tonight that men and women of the 1940s had much the same vision when they were 21. I'm going to track a person, Pat, from New Zealand, and his experiences in the Second World War. Firstly, I'll cover him going to war. Secondly, I'll cover the theatre of war. And thirdly, his experiences as a POW and his return back to New Zealand. On the 3rd of September 1939, Britain, Australia, New Zealand and France declared war on Germany because it just invaded Poland. For the first few years, they just used the regular troops to go over from New Zealand. But after that, they introduced a ballot, and Pat was on the ballot with his brother Terry. He wasn't that disappointed. In fact, he was quite excited because this was his chance as a young man to go and see the world, to see all the historical places he'd only just read about. And he set off from New Zealand on the mighty ship, the Aquitania. And Aquitania was the sister ship of the Queen Mary and the Queen Elizabeth. And he set off on this summer's day. They were escorted by the warship, the Achilles. And he remembers looking out over the deck and seeing all the porpoises flowing along in front of the ship and the heavy waves cascading over the Achilles as he headed off toward, firstly, Australia. He landed in Fremantle, and in Fremantle, since the Aquitania was such a large ship, it wasn't allowed into port. And in fact, the soldiers were not allowed off board. He was rather annoyed about this, so disguised himself as a wharfie, loading the ship, and snuck off to Fremantle. He went to a dance with a few of his mates and got arrested by the military police the next day and sent back to the ship and told he'd be punished later on. The trip across to the Middle East was a long one, and the soldiers filled in their time playing games, getting to know each other, and the occasional boxing bout. And he was quite good at boxing because he learned at the Celtic Club back in New Zealand, and he did quite well. And when they hit land, it was in Sri Lanka, and later on they went down to the Red Sea in the Gulf of Aqaba. And there you could see Mount Ararat, and that's where Moses was given the Ten Commandments. And it's filled with awe of all these historical places he'd gone to. They disembarked at the top of the Red Sea. And for the next few months, in fact about half a year, they trained in the desert. But still it was fun. He was with his mates, there's a lot of joking. And they go out in these heavy, these route marches in this hot sun. But amazingly enough, if you panned out to the side, you'd see all these Bedouins and Arabs running along beside, baskets on the head of ice and lemonade and cigarettes. Whenever the men stopped, they'd come and barter and do their wares. He was very lucky because he teamed up with a man named Andy, and Andy was a real jokester and also a photographer. At one stage later on, when the bombs were dropping all around, Andy poked his head up and said, "Gee, this is exciting, isn't it, Pat?" So, anyway, the time came when Rommel, I better start this, I think.
Go closer to the data projector.
Oh, sorry. Anyway, that's it. Sorry.
It's the muting button.
That's
Yes.
the one. Thank you. In 1942, Rommel had retaken Tobruk. Rommel was the great German general, and he commanded a whole lot of Panzer tanks that were far superior to the Allied tanks. The Australians had very bravely held and kept Tobruk. But Rommel took it back and was advancing steadily toward Egypt. The job of the Allied troops was to stop them. Now, Pat remembers very keenly that they were asked to sort of charge into battle at night time. And across his path were these tracer bullets, about 3 foot high. He watched them and waited until whoever was firing them's finger got tired, and then he raced through with his mates. But in the darkness, there was so much confusion that he lost the main party. He was called ahead, but he decided to stay behind, look after one of his mates who was injured. And he helped bandage the wound. In the morning, he asked his friend how his first aid was, and his friend said, "Well, fantastic, Pat, but nowhere near the wound, sorry." And of course, in the morning, he was behind enemy lines, and he got caught by the Germans. They were held there and sent over to Italy in these troop ships. And he spent several years in an Italian prisoner of war camp. The Allies then, there was then the armistice in which Italy and Italy joined the Allied forces. So he thought that he was free at last. But no, the Germans came and recaptured him, and he was sent up to Dresden. There in Dresden, it was very, very cold, but he was sent to the meatworks, and there they had their own heating system, and they had a fresh supply of meat as well. And the locals used to slip them food as they went out into the townships to do work. Until, of course, the terrible time in 1945, in July, when the Allies came over Dresden and bombed it. Soon after that, the war ended, and Pat found a few of his mates in an old motorcycle and travelled around with an old flag he'd made out of bits and pieces, an old Union Jack. It was a race to be found by the Americans or the Allies rather than the Russians. And he did this and headed back to the cliffs of Dover. He returned to New Zealand, but Pat wasn't a hero. He was just an ordinary bloke. And during the war, he enjoyed the excitement and the thrill of where he was. I think I liken his experiences to that of the Anzac spirit, of mateship getting one through. And Pat, he was my father.